Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. I thought January and February were hard, but March is kind of kicking my ass.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Spring break is right around the corner, though.
Yeah, that'll actually be nice.
That will be nice.
This episode is going out late because we're recording this part basically when I should be releasing it.
Woohoo!
It's good times. Let's see. What has been going on? So it's been super interesting with Go at school because I think one of the things that has definitely been difficult to wrap my head around as a parent is I feel like, I don't know if this was true for you. I have the sense this was true for you, but this was definitely true for me. I was just a good student and I wanted to do well. And I don't know if I always did extra credit if there was extra credit, but most of the time I did. And if there was a project, I certainly tried to do the best job on that project and can even remember, I was in a really wild 6th grade class and we were competitive on the projects. We had to build all of these dioramas and people went all out to crazy degrees. And I was certainly in there with the best of them. And our kids, in different ways, I feel just do not have that. Or they certainly have, I think some of it for me came from a certain sense of anxiety, shockingly. But if there's something they perceive as extra, they will just not do it. And there's tons of school stuff where they're just no. And look, it's great. It's great that they don't want to do all the spirit days because spirit days are incredibly trying to figure out. But they just have no sense that they have to do anything extra at all. And they feel no sense. Have you noticed this? Is this at all something you've reacted to as a parent?
I've just accepted it. I feel broken.
Well, on one level, I feel it's healthier. Me being super stressed about everything, I don't think that was superb. On the other,
but I just want to make sure that they don't miss opportunities.
Yeah. But it's been cool because Go has actually gotten excited about something.
Yes.
And I think...
Which is?
So his class is doing a market. And all of his grade is doing a market. And all of the classes are going to sell something. But kids can also pick an item or service to sell and have their own booth. And he was all in on doing as much of it as he could. Do you think you know why, this has been the thing and not other things?
You have to remember that this is a kid who really wants to, invent things. He, more than Reader, I believe, Go has an entrepreneurial mindset. He wants to make a thing and have people see value in it such that they then buy it. And not just he has a skill that has value.
Yeah.
Reader has his own ambitions. But with Go, I can see him actually inventing a widget that outwidgets other widgets.
Yeah.
So for him, and also he loves storytelling. So for Go, having a school market is kind of a magical confluence of him being able to tell a story through a product that he's selling, and to be able to come up with fun signage and then put on that salesman character. Like, it's all of the things that he kind of likes to do, minus costumes. But I bet if the teachers said that it's okay if you dress up in costume for the market, he totally would. He's all in.
Yeah.
He's very excited. And I did the sort of thing when I was in 5th grade, I think. But I love that he's doing it in 3rd grade.
Yeah.
More, because when you're younger, I think there is that more magical passion than when you're a 5th grader and you're doing it to learn about like economics at a basic level. Mm-hmm. It's a little more academic, Yeah. But with this, it's like they're coming up with they're selling the thing. It's very exciting.
Yeah. So it's just been fun. And so far he's done all the work, and it's cool to see that excitement.
Absolutely.
I think like that's what's so nice about it. Because I don't, like I said, like I actually think it's healthy that they don't feel the need to like push themselves to the 100th degree for everything. But to your point, like it's good to know they can get excited and do that when it's the thing they care about.
Yes.
Our guest today is somebody I've wanted to have on the podcast for a long time. He was very understanding about us having weird construction noises in our house during the interview. But Alastair Lichten is a humanist activist and a community organizer. I follow his blog called A Humanist Dad, and it's wonderful. He writes about political issues and social issues, parenting, family, and relationships, all from the perspective of being a progressive humanist parent. And he has also done amazing work. So he led education campaigns for the UK's National Secular Society and local groups for Humanist UK. And I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is just amazing. And we connected because you actually reached out to us last year to answer some questions for your blog, The Humanist Dad. And that was so much fun. I still am behind on going back and reading a lot of your other profiles, but I really feel like they were just so insightful, and it really like gave me some time to think about what we're doing. And so thank you so much for that.
Oh, no, thanks. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me on the podcast. And thank you for responding to my kind of parenting perspective questions. Because I think what I really like on the podcast with you two is it's such a privilege to hear and kind of listening to that kind of reflective, intentional back and forth thinking about how you're parenting, that kind of thinking out loud. And that I'm really glad that kind of came through when you're answering my interview questions.
Yeah, we can't help being who we are. To start, I wanted to ask what we ask a lot of our guests, which is, if you're comfortable, would you mind sharing your humanist superhero origin story? Like, how did you become interested in it? And like, when did that become a bigger part of your life?
I'm a superhero. It's great. I think I've got a Super Dad mug somewhere around here, which I think you get issued that when you become a dad. But I got involved in the atheist, humanist, skeptic movement when I was in university. That was the time of the God delusion, and when movement atheism was really on the rise. So I was involved in a student secular group, and a lot of online discussions. I marched against the Pope's state visit to the UK, etc. And after university, I was really fortunate enough to be able to work in humanism-related stuff for most of my career. So I spent 8 years at the National Secular Society leading on education campaigns, and then 3 years most recently at Humanist UK working on local groups and communities. I've never really been religious. Our family didn't really have any clearly religious practices, beliefs, or identities growing up. We almost never went to church or synagogue. But at the same time, humanism was not really an option I was aware of. In the UK, my mainstream, typical, pretty secular experience of religious education at school didn't really have the concept of non-religious as a distinct thing, let alone being humanist. The impression you get through that system is that everyone is kind of sort of religious by default. Some people are really serious about it, and some people are not so serious about it. But kind of just the idea that everyone's sort of religious. And humanism is a label that people tend to come to often later and often long after actually becoming a humanist, and they realize that this label applies to them. So I became an atheist and interested in atheism pretty much as soon as I gave the question any thought, and that was probably around that kind of new atheist movement. But it was really becoming a father, I guess, kind of which was led to me centering humanism within my more nebulous non-religious identity.
Every time I read your blog, it sort of makes me think about the podcast, because we decided to call it The Family Skeptical. We talk a lot about atheism, but I feel like humanism is kind of the backdrop to a lot of what we do, but we don't call it out nearly as much as a lot of other things. And so I was wondering, like, since you have been so active in this, like, would you give the sort of definition of humanism that you typically work with?
Firstly, can I just say that's like the kindest thing you can say about someone's and it's definitely a compliment that I would really repay to you. There's so often I've listened to some of the podcast and I've been like, oh, this is one of the 20 ideas that I really want to write a blog about at the moment. There are a lot of definitions of humanism. A really simple one is that it is a positive alternative to religion. Some people don't like that definition because the way it actually centers religion within the definition, but I think functionally it's pretty useful. But humanism is descriptive rather than prescriptive. There's not there have been international declarations of humanism, or international humanist movements come together and said, this is what humanism is. But even in those cases, they are describing what humanism is. These are not coming down stone tablets down the mountain. A potential problem with that is that humanism, we can end up, because we're describing what's there rather than just being, this is what it is, that for some people, the definition can become kind of a little bit mixed, a little bit fuzzy. I've heard it called atheism with a heart, which I don't like because I think that can be kind of insulting to atheists and people who center atheism within their non-religious identity. The example from just looking up from Humanist UK and what they say, and they say that the word humanist has come to mean someone who, I won't read out the full definition, but kind of the ideas here: trust the scientific method when it comes to understanding how the universe works, makes ethical decisions based on reason, empathy, and concern for human beings and other sentient animals, believes in the absence of an afterlife, that our purpose should be making the one life we have a good one and good for other people as well.
You know, it was so interesting because on the last episode, we talked with Katie from Camp Quest about some secular fostering influencers. And I was listening to one of their podcasts. And at the end, because he had like a very negative experience of religion with a adoptive parent who was religious and yet treated him very badly. And he was talking with his guest about sort of his journey from that and how he's now spiritual. But then when he was describing like what he believes, like how he understands his own spirituality, to me, the description sounded exactly like humanism. You know, so it's so interesting thinking about it being not prescriptive but descriptive. And I wonder how many times you sort of hear something and you're like, oh, that's humanism.
Yeah, I think that's humanism has been a tagline that's been used for different marketing campaigns by various humanist organizations for a reason. It is possible, and everyone has the absolute right to define themselves how they want. And people call themselves, for example, Christian, who don't share anything that really we could clearly identify as a humanist belief, but just have a cultural identity with it. And it's similar with humanism. Humanism can be both an identity label, and where it is an identity label, the individual has the absolute right to decide for themselves whether or not that applies to them. But it can also be a powerful descriptive thing, and we can look at people and we can look and trace throughout the past and throughout history, identify that these people were humanists in their thinking or humanist-like, even if that label had not been something they had come to understand and apply to themselves or necessarily use themselves.
Yeah, because I think like you, it wasn't until I was much older when I read a description where I was like, oh, that's me. I just never had a word for all the things I believe. But so you talked about sort of leaning more into the humanism when you became a dad. And I was wondering what about that experience inspired that? And, you know, now that you have the blog, why you felt it was important to talk about humanism in the context of parenting.
The one way I describe it is that, and you've seen that definition, is I could be given this big, in the past, a big list of possible words that might describe me and the definitions of them. And at every point in my life, if I'd read the definition of humanism, I think I would have ticked and said that word is a word that describes me. But the level of importance it has in describing me and my outlook has been what's changed over my life. It's not just becoming a parent. I think it's the long period of thinking about becoming a parent beforehand really brought a focus to a lot of my thinking on humanist issues. The importance of community, social justice, and what sort of world my kids would grow up in was probably something I was thinking quite a lot about years before actually planning to have my first kid. A lot of my thinking about religion and kids is probably more about older kids, because going back for a bit, as I said, I worked for 8 years as a professional secular education activist, and I would deal with hundreds of pieces of casework of inappropriate religious influence in schools. And I'd often be dealing with issues of biased religious education or school imposed worship or evangelical visits. And a typical phone call or email would start with a parent saying, I'm an atheist, but I want my children to make up their own minds, so I've never told them anything about religion. But something's happened and they've come back from school saying they're a Christian or with all these religious ideas. And I always knew that respecting my kids' right to make their own decisions would need to mean providing them with information.
Mm-hmm.
And how I started the blog is I've often used writing as a way of kind of sometimes therapeutic writing, sometimes just feeling I need to have something to say outside of the strict confines of my job. When I started the blog in a period of life when I was spending a lot of time in hospital with my eldest son, and I was writing these long letters to him. And at the same time, my younger son had real sleep problems, and I was just having these hour-long walks, and I would just start talking to him about stuff. And I was almost thinking about what these conversations I wanted to have with them, probably when they were older, about some of these bigger picture issues. And they really became the first blogs that I published under the Humanist Dad label. And right from the beginning, I really wanted to move beyond the deficit model. I don't talk really that much about the problems of religion or the negatives of religion. I'm talking about the positives of how humanism impacts my parenting. And it's not really necessarily about making them humanists or not really at all. It's about how do I be the best parent I can be. And that for me has always been about, well, by using reason and empathy and my values to guide myself.
So is there something that sort of came up in that period leading to having kids that suddenly felt way more important than, like, is there an example of something that felt way more important before you were actively thinking about becoming a parent?
My background had been in campaigns and specifically challenging religious privilege. And it just became increasingly clear to me that challenging the negative problems of religion, although it was important, I really wanted to be about what are my positive values. I started a blog because although I was very proud of the work I was doing in the particular organization, I wanted to be able to speak out more positively on social justice issues and more wide rangingly than was kind of within the confines of that role. So I guess that was a big part of it. And just doing a bit of a reflection, I realized that I'd been 10 years or so involved in the atheist, secularist, humanist movement. And I did just some looking back at podcasts and videos and books which I'd read 10 years ago and seeing how my perspective had moved on in some ways from that particular period was all part of that, just changing the focus of what I'm personally working on.
And I know it's like the entire blog, so people could go and sort of find any post. But are there any like specific instances that stand out where you feel like how you handled a parenting situation was directly influenced by your humanism?
It can be difficult because it's sometimes really indirect. I try to approach all of the decisions I make with reason and empathy, but that is kind of a background thing. It's more the water we swim in, so you don't really see it. I think about a lot of what it's going to be like having teenagers. I talk about people ask, well, why do you write about, well, what are the issues for humanist parenting? And I often just glibly say, well, sex, drugs, rock and roll. How are we going to approach those issues when they're older? My best parenting is for me small moments when I'm just able to step back and think about, okay, this is something's going wrong here. They're having difficulty with some specific thing. What can I do to stop just banging my head against this, but stop, take a step back? Can I engage rather than engaging my instinctive survival parenting mode? Can I step back? Can I be intentional about this? Can I reason and focus on empathy of what this problem is? If it's a difficult behavior or an area of our lives we're having some high conflict about, and try something, and sometimes that thing doesn't work, or sometimes it does work. Sometimes it does work well, but then I don't continue doing it because we always have that gap between our values and reality sometimes.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, like, I've said it lots of times. I think, like, just in our lives, one of, like, very selfishly, like, one of the best things about doing the podcast has just been being forced to set aside time to think about things. Like, it is so easy to just get in the flow of life and to not do that. And so it can be really hard to just take that time.
It's why I started journaling.
That's really good. It's
scratches the same itch.
Yeah. I've written loads of stuff that's not gone onto the blog because it wasn't necessarily maybe it wasn't actually very good, but I needed it to get it out. And I think journaling and therapeutic writing are really, really great tools, and something that in a busy parenting life, it's incredibly difficult to make time for. Voice notes on your phone can be a particular thing to help with that as well.
Yeah, I need to do that more. So I'm curious. We just had something really interesting happen because in Go's class, they had a thing where they had to bring in food that was like related to their
This was perfect.
heritage. And we didn't even talk about it. I don't know if you noticed this, like related to their heritage as a family. And so he decided to bring matzah because my family is Jewish, and pretzels because we also have some German heritage. And the teacher, and he's bringing it, and I was like thinking about it, and we definitely had an issue at the last school we were at where he was the only Jewish kid in his class, but like we don't do a lot of Jewish activities at home because like obviously I'm a secular Jew and like my mom does some stuff with him, but like we do not go to synagogue. He has very little experience with all of that. So like at his old school, they were like, you can tell everybody about Hanukkah. And I was just like, what is he like? We've read a book, but what is he going to say? Like it was a total mystery to me. And so he's bringing in matzah. There were like lots of Jewish kids at his new school. So
like real Jews.
Like, yeah, like where it's a big part of the family tradition. So again, I had this moment of like, what is he going to say? And are people going to expect him to like know more about this experience than he does? And I was sort of thinking like, should I tell him to mention that we're like secular Jews? And then I was just like,
I helped him put together his presentation, and I made really sure that he put in that he's a secular Jew. And that he talked about it because that headed all of that off at the pass. Okay. I also figured that it might start a conversation about, hey, what is this secular thing? But it didn't, unfortunately. I saw the video. He did a great job and he was hilarious. But he made this whole joke about how you're supposed to serve beer with the pretzels. And the kids started laughing. And I was like, yeah, that's my boy.
Well, I didn't know if he had come up with that on his own. That's fascinating. No. Clearly, the only time we talk about our parenting is on the podcast. But I'm just sort of curious. I know your kids are a lot younger than ours, but do you have any sort of plans or thoughts about, I think we're both on the same page that we're not like set on our kids being atheists or humanists, but like, are there ways you plan to sort of inform them about humanism so they like have that information as they're making choices, or to talk to them about kind of how your family or how you identify?
We think a lot as a family about how we're going to incorporate those sorts of practices. I think it is valuable, and by experiencing and understanding what humanism is and what the potential for humanist community and humanist traditions is as they grow up, I think that will help them understand religious peers. It will not necessarily make them humanists, and I wouldn't aim for that and want that to be that. But for example, let's say they grow up and they decide that they're Christian. Well, my experiences of taking them to Sunday Assembly, which is our secular congregation, I'm a coordinator of a local humanist group. I'm trying to make any activities we do family friendly. Their experiences of that will help them then connect with and have a frame of reference for understanding religious traditions and religious practices as well. Humanists don't have a food or dress, etc., that's very specific to us. Though there are many humanists are vegan and vegetarian and actually link that specifically to their humanism, but that's not a universal thing. But the children will grow up understanding that we have traditions and rituals as a family that we've created together and can change as and where they're working or not working for us. I think there's a lot of value in those traditions. When they're older, we will talk about our Jewish heritage that we have in our family, and how that may have influenced my parenting. Although that's something that I think they will feel kind of quite separate from, because of how these things kind of go down to the generations. We draw attention to the things that we have, like they understand that we've just finished February. In the UK, February is LGBT History Month, and October's Black History Month. It's swapped over, I think, in the US, but we've had our LGBT Progress Pride flags up. We've got our feminist flag up at the moment for Women's History Month. We have some nice autism pride badges, which we have up in April, celebrating that month. And they will begin to ask questions about those things as they get older, and of all the traditions that we try and create as a family. And we are conscious in the way that we try to create traditions, because I think if you're conscious about that, you can make those traditions work for you, and you can grow up understanding that they are something that you can change if they're not working for you. Traditions and rituals are tools, not handcuffs.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, like, I feel like we do this, but we're like locked in our rooms all alone. And with all of the work you've done, you have been much more out in the world talking to people, and particularly people who may not be as familiar kind of with humanism and other things. Do you think there are like big areas of misconceptions or things? I mean, there's certainly people who just have probably like never heard the term, but do you think there are big areas of sort of like misconceptions or misunderstandings about humanism?
I think so. There is kind of often competing misunderstandings or misconceptions, and often they're not necessarily wrong. That in people's views of humanism, they're just quite limited. The kind of sandal wearing, woke liberal university professor humanist, that's not wrong. there's plenty of them. It's just that's humanism is more wide ranging than that. I think a lot of conceptions of non-religious identities have been very informed and maybe set in stone by the height of at the time there was the height of that new atheist movement. So people's conception of what an atheist is, and atheist humanism are often used interchangeably, are very informed by certain individuals who are pretty much like fringe figures within the modern humanist movement. And I don't say that I was about to say I don't say that in a derogatory sense. I mean I don't mean that in just a derogatory sense. I mean it in a factual descriptive sense.
Yeah.
Sense as well. Or there's a misconception that humanism is just about religion, and that's like saying skepticism is just about debunking Bigfoot. It's actually a tool set, a way of thinking about the world. I think that humanism is becoming better understood in the UK because of pressure to include non-religious worldviews in religious education. As I say, at school, my religious education never pushed me to be religious. It just never mentioned that being not religious was a thing. Right. There's nothing like a balanced or a equality of esteem between religious and non-religious worldviews in UK education, but we are somewhat starting in that direction. Across the 4 nations of the UK, it's different, which I'm sure there'll probably be similar things across the 50 states. So in Scotland and Northern Ireland, humanist marriage is legally recognised, and that's had a massive impact in people's familiarity with humanism. So in Scotland, around 1 in 5 people every year have been to or know someone who's been to a humanist wedding. And over time, and this I think is what really separates it from that debate me bro new atheist movement, is that humanists have discovered that we are really just completely ineffective at persuading people or arguing people into humanism. Our numbers grow and our acceptance grows when people come to understand themselves as humanists, or come to understand their values as being aligned with humanism, or come to see examples of humanists within their everyday life.
That makes a lot of sense. So, doing a hard pivot, am I correct that, like Pops, you also had a later in life autism diagnosis?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, not. What you really want on a podcast is just one word answers. Yep. Ask away.
Crickets. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm curious, sort of where, like, do you mind sharing, like, sort of when within your humanist work and parenting you found out you were autistic?
So I recently learned that most neurotypical people don't spend decades wondering if they might be autistic.
No, that's usually a red flag. Yeah.
So I actually think it was a skeptical podcast that maybe pushed me on the path to getting going down the diagnosis and exploring if that applied to me route, because something said on the podcast is that they'd been hesitant to go and explore a diagnosis because they actually felt they had all these good coping mechanisms, and then one of their partners asked them, yeah, but what if you've learnt the wrong coping mechanisms? Like a lot of autistic adults, my diagnosis came about closely related to trauma, where my coping skills and masking abilities pretty much broke down. So it's a strange thing of, I don't consider being autistic in a trauma, but the coming to understand myself as autistic was around trauma. So my son Teddy, just after his third birthday, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Oh no.
No, that was and as you might imagine, treatment was, he had stage 4 neuroblastoma, and the treatment for it is some of the most grueling of any childhood cancer, and it was very traumatic. And while my coming to fully understand myself as autistic was part of the treatment for PTSD that I was receiving, what happened was, after a few sessions, the therapist gently mentioned, "Do you think you might be autistic?" And I gave the most autistic possible series of answers to answer that question, which goes back to my thing of, apparently most neurotypical people don't spend decades thinking about that.
I'm curious if that experience sort of changed your experience of humanism at all. Yeah, I just wonder if it had any kind of impact on how you saw these issues or parenting.
I think so. I think neurodiversity comes up a lot in my discussions of humanist parenting.
Interesting.
And also, and quite linked, actually, neurodiversity and queerness. I'm not a member of the queer community myself, but I think a lot of thinking and describing of what it's like to be neurodiverse or what it's like to be queer has had big influences on the development of humanist culture and humanist community. If you go to a local humanist group, you're going to find a lot of people there and if you look at the membership of humanist organizations, you're going to find and the research is very clear on people that are members of the LGBT community, and I suspect it's quite true also of neurodiverse people make up large parts of our membership. There, I think that one of the biggest areas where kind of my neurodiverse influences and humanist influences on my parenting come about is because there are a lot of practices and approaches which come as second nature to most people. But what neurodiverse people and also humanists who have rejected a dominant religious framework have in common is they often need to think actively about processes, practices, traditions that might come second nature to others. And that really intentional process can be hugely far more demanding, even exhausting, but often means that we spot problems that maybe others don't and end up taking things apart and reinventing them to work better for us. So I've spoken to neurodiverse people who's like, well, I was asking questions in church because I hadn't absorbed the unspoken social rule of not asking questions about this particular thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of those things that I've been talking about with my folks and therapists is that, not my parents, but like other autistic folks, is like with religion and like what a lot of people have to face when deconstructing, is that loss of community. But with neurodivergent folks, where you're finally, especially in late life diagnoses, finally realizing what you need and how you could potentially work your life better to get it, is that sense of community and camaraderie. And that can be very difficult for a lot of neurodivergent folks who have, social anxieties or issues with building and maintaining relationships. And if I would imagine, if I were living in a very religious society and I was a secular person, that I would also have to go out of my way to say, okay, how can I work my life so I can actually find or attract people who are similar to me? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be in person? And that was a huge challenge for me, but I've also found that there's a lot of correlation with folks in more like conservative rural communities that I've talked to, who found out in their 20s or 30s that they really don't believe in the gods of their parents or their communities, and that they have to go out on their own, but they also don't want to move away from home. And so they have to chart their own course, and that can be really challenging.
There's something Mum said in a previous episode, which I loved, and I've used it as find the weirdos.
Yeah, exactly.
There's my blog that I'm writing this week is on humanist joy, and that sort of, there's a joy that comes from being your authentic self and finding other people sharing and thinking about these same things. Because for many people, for autistic people, often we have special interests, and other people can't really understand, well, why is thinking about that so interesting, and why are you thinking so much about this? And similarly, the idea of, well, actually, there's no God isn't real, religion is a human invention, this is the one life we have. Some people recognize those things, and that's probably right, but why does it matter so much to you? Why are you so interested in it? And it's like, well, actually, because I think it's amazing that this is the one life we have. I think it's amazing that humans created all of these, that everything that we think of as coming down from the heavens, actually humans made that. We did that, and that's amazing. It's really interesting, and it's for many autistic humanist people, that might be one of their special interests.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I know Pops has been like very open with the boys about what he's gone through and discovered. Given that your kids are younger, it just might not have sort of come up naturally in the same way. But do you have you spoken with them about being neurodivergent, or do you sort of have a notion of how you're going to talk to them about that?
We will probably be incredibly intentional and we are already having so many conversations, me and my wife, about this, and think and overthink this massively, and then actually discover that we kind of just get on. We get on with it. My kids are 3 and 5, so we're kind of just now thinking about this. We have children's books on neurodiversity, which the children have been quite interested in. Actually, we don't necessarily use those labels. We let them pick them and read them how they want. We have our neurodiversity pride badges all up in the living room in April. My wife and I were both late diagnosed autistic adults. That informs the way that we think about and have these parenting conversations. My eldest doesn't have an autism diagnosis, but that's something we may well pursue and discuss with him. It's our youngest shows no signs of being neurodiverse, which we don't know where that came from. Being
Not yet.
I just don't. I just don't know what you do with a neurotypical kid. We've got various kind of emotion boards and storytelling things for talking about emotions. And when he was 2 years old, he was walking up and going, "That one is sad. That one is happy." And my wife and I looking at pictures and being like, yeah, maybe. But I'll take your word for it. His school and education support that he receives is based on need, not diagnosis. That's something that's important for us. And at the moment, if the education support he's getting, which is largely built around the fact that he's only 16 months in, only now managed to do a full school day, that's really what his current support is around. So as long as he's receiving what he needs, diagnosis is something that may or may not come along later. And it turns out that accidentally we've kind of got loads of neurodiverse adults around us because some of whom also late diagnosed. And it turns out we could have, maybe there's a reason that we ended up gelling and being friends and having those connections that we didn't realize.
It reminds me a little bit, not so much now, but when Vitor was very young, he was like a super social kid. And that was so different from me. And I do I had a moment where I was like, wait, what do I do if he's popular? Like, I have no reference point for what that is like as a child. Like, what if one of these kids is popular? I'm going to have no advice for them at all. They're going to have so many social situations I have no idea how to handle. It's always interesting. So I am curious, since you're coming from more of a UK reference point, do you feel like issues around atheism and humanism like differ significantly with what you're dealing with in the UK versus what you're seeing in America?
Absolutely. They are very different countries. And in the UK, perhaps because of the Anglosphere and American culture generally, maybe we have a bit of a warped view, or we think too much. We compare ourselves to America more than we should be comparing ourselves to Europe, perhaps. Though I've always been interested in US politics, and particularly around the atheism religion thing, because I studied it in high school, comparative politics at university. That was always been a bit of an interest of mine. But one of the reasons for my Humanist Dad blog is when I was going and looking for writing about humanist parenting, a lot of it was focused on the US and not directly culturally relevant. And a lot of it was also focusing on the issues of 10 years ago, because when the atheist movement was at that particular, new atheist movement had a particular cultural moment, publishers were more interested in books about humanist parenting than they may be today. As an outsider, it's clear now that America just has a Christo-fascist regime. It's not on the way to fascism, sliding to authoritarianism. That's just where the US is now. Before my kids were born, I remember looking up a list of Googling what's going to happen in the next 10 years and looking at future events that were likely to happen and imagining how they would be, what it'd be like for them, and thinking about when they were in primary school, they'd be watching us land on Mars. We always say us when we talk about the good things America does. We say we landed on the moon. America napalmed Vietnamese villages. We don't use the collective we for everything America does. But just imagining, it should have been, when my kids are in primary school, they should be watching America / the humans landing on Mars. And I mean, are they going to be probably watching trans people being rounded up and put in treatment centers, never to emerge from again? I don't know. As a parent, as someone with Jewish heritage, and that's not necessarily a big part of my active kind of outlook on the world, but it's part of something that informs my cultural heritage. Thinking about watching a fascist regime take over the most powerful country in the world, and how we talk to our kids about that. How do you talk to your kids about bullying being wrong when bullying is a central part of the ideological makeup of, again, a very powerful movement? I love America. I'm so grateful I was able to take my son to Pennsylvania to visit. We visited the States 3 times for medical treatment. Absolutely. So wonderful that we could access a trial there at Penn State. God damn it! I'm glad that I don't need to go back at the moment. I'm
No offense taken.
No, hopefully not. I'm so proud of my friends in the humanist, atheist, secularist movement in America who, in the last election, took and made Project 2025 the defining issue of the electoral campaign.
Yeah.
And just heartbroken. I went into the Humanist UK office the day after, the morning after the election, and people, particularly some of our staff members at the time who were American, in tears.
Yeah.
In the UK last year, we kicked out a 14-year-old Conservative government that had just basically wrecked and hollowed out every aspect of our welfare state. So that can happen. I remember thinking it changing, like, my optimism. It was not a huge, in this country we elected kind of a centrist government. It wasn't a massive sea change. The Conservatives did suffer a massive electoral defeat, but it wasn't a bright shining tomorrow's a brand new day moment. But at the same time, I just felt more optimistic about my kids' future, and seeing around the world now, I am optimistic that I can create for them a village or a place of inclusion and love. But are those values, will those values politically hold sway? I don't know. Efforts to impose any sort of American Christo-fascist style culture war ideology in the UK have not really been successful at the moment, but we are far more the expression when America sneezes, the UK catches a cold, or perhaps it's the other way around. We are far more vulnerable to that in this country than I think many people realize. We have this sort of spectre of America, and we can always say on so many issues, America's doing this, and of course we're us Brits are far too sensible for that. But we're the transphobia capital of Europe.
Yeah.
Elon Musk wants to spend $100 million boosting the UK far right, or he flirted with that idea at the moment. Scary times in lots of ways.
Yeah, it is. You brought up the issue of bullying, and I think one thing I am very thankful about being an atheist and a humanist is that, like, there is nothing in our worldview that has ever encouraged us to teach the kids that, like, you should look up to people in authority because they are in authority. Like, my greatest wish for them is that, and I have thought about this a lot as a kid that was like a consummate rule follower. I was terrified to get in trouble. I had like a few moments senior year of high school when I like just was tired of everything and then kind of went off the rails in college. But like for the most part, I just followed the rules and like did not want to stick my neck out, did not want to get in trouble. And I have thought very actively about how we will talk to the kids about that. Because I think when someone in authority is being awful, like that is a difficult situation. And I hope, and like in their own lives, what I will impart to them is like, you always have to decide like how much you want to take it on yourself. And if you want to be the kid getting in trouble to challenge something, like if that's a legitimate thing to challenge, Pops and I will have your back 100%. Yes. And if it's not a big deal, or like you don't see people being hurt, but it's just terrible and you just want to like put your head down and get through it, like that is also a legitimate decision in some situations.
Yeah.
and sort of having that be more of a conversation. But the good thing is, like, we have, there is nothing in our household that would suggest that people in authority should be looked up to simply because they are in authority, that everybody has to be judged on their merits. And so I think that's more complex when you come from more high control religious or sort of other cultural movements, because if there's danger in challenging authority, I think that gets more complex. But at least for us, like, it's real easy for us to be like, look what they did. That's awful. Don't be like that, for this reason and for all the, and we don't even have to tell them. They are empathetic kids. And so if we just lay out what some people are doing, they very easily on their own know that that is not how they want to act in the world.
Well, what is it that Reader said when he first saw a video in early on? It was it was a 2016 election cycle, and Reader saw some video of Trump at some sort of campaign rally spewing his whatever. And Reader says, he's a bad guy. And so I was like, all right, I don't have to worry about him. I'm just going to walk away. He's going to manage this himself. He can figure it out. But still, there's going to be a lot of nuance as they grow up, and trying to parse out the fights they should take up versus the fights they should avoid, I think is going to be increasingly difficult, because they're both really empathetic kids. And especially with Go, he has a very acute sense of justice. We joke that he should be a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union. But there's a certain truth to that. Like, being a parent of empathetic children, trying to teach them to sort of take advantage of that empathy and to create a better world is going to be an uphill battle. But that, I think, is something that should give us more hope, even though times are kind of black right now.
Yeah. And we see that young people, and I actually think that generations of anti-bullying messages in school have created in young people the idea that it's not acceptable, and hopefully they will go on, and many of them will joy to them bring that to their politics. Protection and challenging bullies, you can't do that on your own. You've got to find the weirdos, get together. What I want my kids to be is, I want my kids to be feel safe enough to be brave.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
My kids tell me off and the idea, particularly in gentle parenting, which really fits with my humanist values of not seeing non-compliance in children, or for the purpose of parenting is not compliance. It is the level of non-compliance I have for my kids is absolutely infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. They drive me crazy. And sometimes I do just wish that I could shout and say, "I'm your father, and you will do it because I'm your father. Do it now." Mm-hmm. And maybe, but that's not actually what I'm trying to achieve. Getting them to see the value in questioning is a way actually of keeping them safe. I want my kids to be able to resist negative peer pressure around all around all sorts of things, and them resisting my desires in some ways, resisting my orders and what I want for my life to be convenient, and what that is in a way testing them and preparing them for resisting things from peers or bosses. I would love my children never to have to be bullied in the school, workplace, etc., or by politicians. Got to, but yeah, find the weirdos, get together, make yourselves safe enough to be brave.
That is so smart. I mean, I think along with wanting encouraging that agency. I haven't really thought about it, but like when they ask questions, we try really hard to give them good, cogent answers. I think sometimes more than they even want. And on like a very different level, I hadn't thought about it, but like I also hope that makes them less likely to accept bad answers. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't want to encourage just like accepting and I said so, we're kind of a hand wave.
Right. Well, that's part of skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Like we shouldn't help them have a belief in something that they themselves can't justify. At the same time, it is hard as a parent because like, should you really have to go into like a dissertation to explain why they need to clean their room, right? Like you shouldn't have to, but sometimes taking that step back and, like you were just saying, Alastair, is like stopping your own urge to have that sort of parental authority and instead saying, no, this is why, so you can help them develop some sort of like better heuristic. So when they encounter something moving forward in their life, they're like, oh, there's this thing I do instinctively. I should trust that. It yields a good result. Like that, I think, is the hardest thing. But that's also, as a parent, for my money, the most rewarding thing. And also like being ADHD in that regard, I believe helps me because it enables me to see that opportunity and not be like, oh, I was doing this other thing. I need to stay on task with that. I can be like, oh, I'm enthusiastic about this thing you're asking me about. Let's talk about it until you're tired of hearing my answers.
Yeah.
And that is not a bad thing.
There's also the not punishing the behavior you want to see is a
I mean, we want them to question. Stop questioning me. It's like
at the moment, both my kids are in a real why stage when kids realize that they can just ask why to every question, and it is incredibly annoying.
And they never grow out of it.
Trying to not say stop asking why because I want them to be asking why. Actually, maybe why I want to be encouraging to ask better questions than just why, because I want to ask the question,
it's a start.
Yeah, and they get annoyed, and sometimes I do. Sometimes I try very often to say, "Why do you think?" and try to get them to think of an answer themselves before just wanting me to give them to answer. And they find that frustrating because it's hard work, and we can't do this all the time. There's survival parenting and there's intentional parenting, and we often, I mean, if my kid's about to touch the hot stove, I'm grabbing their arm and pulling it back. I'm not letting them touch the hot stove. But we often treat things as survival. We need them to have the right answer, and so some humanist or atheist parents get really worried if their kid starts saying, I believe in God, like, oh, God is this, they get so worried about it. We treat things as emergencies. We think of, oh, if they're defying my authority, how are they ever going to follow instructions at school and then follow instructions at work? And actually, well, maybe we don't want them to follow authority figures, and we can't always do that. Sometimes circumstances do force us. Sometimes you can't give a complete reasoned explanation of everything. There's been time I will sit for 20 minutes trying to gentle parent them into doing something if it's a choose to thing. And we talk about choose to and need to things in the house. And if something's a choose to thing, I don't get to force them to do it. If it's a need to thing, if it's their safety, I need to. The amount of tolerance I will have for gentle parenting and trying to slowly talk my kid round to do something, if it's not necessary, is infinite. But then, I sometimes I've held them down to have needles jabbed in them because they need to. It's urgent, and we can't always reason with them. We can't always give our children adequate explanations for some of the things that we need to do, but we can at least show them that is the aim.
Yeah. I think we have to call it there. If people want to follow you or see more about what you're thinking about, what is the best way to do that?
So my website is humanistdad.uk, and I'm on Facebook at search a humanist dad on Facebook, and there's a nice little avatar of me, and find me and follow. And for a long time, the blog had been kind of a personal project, and I'm now trying to make it something that can reach a wider audience, and starting to see some of that, and that's really means a lot to me. So please, if it's interesting to you, share it with other people and comment. And there's lots of stuff back there, so you can go back and read and hopefully find something useful.
I just followed. You can too.
That was so great. I really loved what he said about finding community and
yes,
how people need to be brave. And in that final part of the conversation, it really made me think, because he is just so amazingly thoughtful about his parenting. And I feel like was more thoughtful about it leading up to parenting than probably I was. And then I was also thinking about activism. And I just think it is so strange being a parent, because I don't know if this is true for everybody, but, very similar to what he talked about, like becoming a parent made me even more concerned about issues and kind of what the world is going to look like moving into the future.
Sure.
But at the same time, it is like also the time when I have had the least time and energy to put towards anything having to do with that. So it just made me think about how strange that space is. And just huge props to all the parents, like finding time to try to make a positive impact while also doing this parenting thing.
Yeah, especially now, which is one of the things we talked about, which is how hard it is to be a parent trying to teach your kid empathy. It feels like there's parenting, and then which is one category of tasks. And then there's parenting in 2025, which is a whole separate category of tasks. And then there's being an adult human being in 2025. That's a whole other category of tasks. And then there's everything having to do with self-care, which is a whole separate category of tasks. So it feels like at any given point, I have at least 4 plates to spin.
That is exactly it. So let's wrap it up there. As always, we have to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
Is that just our children making
Yeah,
noise?
it is. I'm going to go talk to them. Hang on.
Okay, they're usually they're usually not that loud.
They always seem to be loud when you need them to be.
Yes.
You need to never ever tell them that you need them to be quiet.
Oh, I know. I don't know if we even did. They're usually zoned out on screens right after school. So I'm a little surprised.